Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Leadership Lenses, the podcast designed for principals, Rosh Yeshiva, heads of school, and anyone else who is looking to enhance and improve Jewish education and Jewish day schools. I am thrilled to have with us today someone who has worked for many years, both within a school context and now in a broader context, at doing just that. So it's our pleasure to welcome Melissa Rivkin, who is currently the Director of Day School Strategy at the Samis Foundation in Seattle. Melissa, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here.
And just before we get into our topic, which I think is really going to have a lot to offer people, just tell us a little bit about how you got to Samis, what's your background, and what do you do now typically for the foundation?
Okay, so I came to Samis via one of the schools, and even before that, I was getting in. I was one of the volunteers who made Jewish communal life a job after running an English as a second language school for many years in Seattle's University District. And so before coming to Samis, I was working as the director of advancement at one of the schools in Seattle, Northwest Yeshiva High School. And then in 2019, came to Samis as the director of day school strategy. And, the Samis Foundation in Seattle, we support Jewish education K through 12 in all formats, but specifically Jewish day schools, as intensive immersive Jewish education is one of the best indicators of a vibrant Jewish future. And that has always been the case since the inception of the foundation, which was 1994. And at Samis, since we're talking about affordability, Samis has always obsessed about affordability since the 90s and always looking for ways to try to bring that tuition barrier down for families.
Amazing. And so Samis, for those who might not be familiar, is a really, I think, game-changing foundation in Seattle, broadly in Jewish education, but in the Jewish day school scene specifically, with a number of pillars in their work. And one of the key pieces, as Melissa just noted, that they work on is affordability. And as part of that, they've done a number of interesting studies. And what I'd love to talk with you about today, Melissa, is the most recent study that Samis did. I know you recently published an article referring to it in Prisma's most recent Hayedion issue. And to me, it was revisiting a topic that, as you said, has been crucial for 3 decades and coming up with some new interesting insights. Those insights are relevant in Seattle, but I think they'll be relevant elsewhere as well. So take us into the study a little bit. Tell us what were you looking at and what even brought you to this approach?
Okay, so the study that we just published is the Catholic school comparison with Jewish day schools. And this, like I said, we've been obsessing about affordability for decades and have instituted a number of affordability initiatives in Seattle. At the same time, we know that it's not enough. And since October 7th, there have been so many voices in the wider Jewish world who have been really sort of pounding that drum about the importance of day school for educating and inspiring the next generation of literate, fluent Jews. And why can't we get tuition down to Catholic school levels? And some of these voices we're all very familiar with. Dan Senior, Barry Weiss, Brett Stevens, in big platforms. And so it was in this past December this year, that one of our trustees stood up at a board meeting and said, let's try to figure out why. We want to figure out why. And originally, this study was supposed to just be an article doing a little research on why day schools are not as affordable as Catholic schools. And the more we delved into the Catholic school system, the more we realized we needed to learn a lot more. There was a lot that we didn't really understand. And so that's how this report came about.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Right. So it's looking to a different context, and just to ballpark it for people listening, what's, a range of Catholic school tuition versus a range of Jewish school tuition? I know there's a lot more detail there, but just to give us the ballparks we're playing in.
Okay. So first of all, I want to be very clear that we looked at 5 communities, And we could have looked at 35 communities, but we looked at 5 communities, and we specifically looked at communities that were similar to Seattle in meaning higher cost of living communities. So, LA, Chicago, Boston, New York. There are a lot of other cities out there. I'm sure the research would be fascinating to delve in, but that's where we started. And when we started looking at the comparisons, again, I want to make clear the list price comparison. So on the school's website, what is the tuition stated on their website in both systems? And we also really looked at trying to have, schools that are apples to apples. So meaning if a school is in, like a fancier area, I'm trying to think of a better word for a higher cost of living area. We looked at a day school in that similar area. So we're trying as best as we can to apples and apples. And we found, huge gap in the range of tuition. So for example, a lot of the Catholic schools tuition are in the $10,000 to $12,000 range, and Jewish day school tuition in the, let's say at the low end, 25,000, and at the high end, up to 65,000 plus. Again, in various communities. We all know that in the Jewish day school world, especially of those familiar with the day schools, we know that the tuition on the website might not be the tuition a family is going to pay, but it is a signal to families of who are not familiar with day schools, whether they belong or not. And so that was a really stark difference for us. And even in Seattle, by the way, has one of the highest Catholic school tuition rates of the 5 cities we studied for many reasons, besides being a high cost of living area. But even in Seattle, the Catholic school rates are like 20,000 to 25,000, and our day schools rates are 25,000 to 35,000 or 34,000, which
Right. So you're
again,
talking double, triple, quadruple these rates. And I imagine most Jewish educators out there are sitting and saying, like, okay, and I'll ask a bit of a challenging question. So what? We're not Catholic schools. You're comparing us to somebody who does a different job. And what can we even learn from that? We're not Catholic schools. So
yeah. And I think
what did you learn?
so one thing I do want people to take away from this is that we are not saying that Jewish schools have to be like Catholic schools. We just wanted to see what we can really learn from them, and are there lessons that we can take away for our community. One of the big learnings for us about the Catholic affordability story is that it really is a community story, and that the gaps are between the two religious systems are really structural. They're not simply financial. But it's not as simple to say, let's just lower tuition. If you're a head of school, anybody who works in a school knows that that's not how it works. But what can we do? And I want to be very clear. Every community is going to have to crack this nut. Like, we did not say this is what you can do, but we did have some learnings, and some areas that of the difference between Catholic schools and Jewish schools, like, we don't want to touch at all. So, for example, there are 4 main drivers. There might be more, but there are 4 main drivers in our report that really point to some of the structural differences between Catholic and Jewish school. The first one is our dual curriculum. We 100% do not want anybody to get rid of the dual curriculum. The dual curriculum, this is our mission, but we have to understand that that Jewish schools are providing both general studies and full-time Judaic studies instruction. This requires additional instructional capacity and staffing. It's not the problem, it's the mission, but we have to understand that is one of the reasons why it's not as simple to say, let's bring it down to Catholic school levels. Another area, well, I'll just rattle off the 4 areas and we can talk
Sure.
about each. So one is the dual curriculum. One is smaller class size and smaller teacher-student ratio and smaller schools in general. The other are security costs, non-negotiables. And the fourth is really a very structural difference between our schools and Catholic schools, and that's our independent nonprofit structure. So those are the
Right.
four main drivers that we really looked at. And the reality is that of those four drivers, three of them are they're structural. They're going to be very hard to change. The only one driver we really have levers on is enrollment. But anyway, those are the four areas
Sure.
that we really looked at.
Absolutely. And so when we think about dual curriculum, obviously that's a different story. When we think about security, unfortunately, that is a fact of life. And
I just want to say with security, even before October 7th, every school had pretty much every day school had a line item in their budget for security. That cost was either passed on to parents directly or embedded in the cost of tuition. After October 7th, security costs have increased. I think the study that we looked at in this report, 124%. That's
wow,
amazing amount of money. And when we looked at that cost being spread through schools, smaller schools, that cost is distributed at much higher levels per student in smaller schools
sure.
versus larger schools. That security is non-negotiable. But I think it's important for all of us to remember that we've always had security, but the costs now are much higher than they ever were before. And some of those costs are recurring yearly, in
Yeah.
security guards. They're not just building fences and installing cameras, but these recurring costs. And so schools, think about it, each school has to increase their budgets for security. But again, it's we're not going to change that, but we need to recognize that.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, nobody's going to save money by cutting security. And the
Correct.
point that you made about smaller schools may need a number of the exact same protections that are not scaling down
Yeah,
just because they have fewer kids. So
exactly.
that's definitely on the dual curriculum and on the security side. The other two factors I think are interesting because they are really built into our schools in a lot of cases.
Mhm.
And at the same time, they may drive a model that's very difficult for us to manage. So I'm curious what you saw in class sizes and what, if any, learnings came out of that for what a Jewish school that, as we know, many Jewish day schools are struggling with budget one way or another. What can we be thinking about?
So this was very interesting to see. I mean, coming from Seattle, we are a small day school community and a relatively small Jewish community. But when so I knew that our local schools are relatively small in the field, and average class sizes also are relatively small in the field. But looking out wider network, seeing, wow, even in some of the very large schools, the student to teacher ratio is still smaller. I think, again, in the report, you get all the numbers absolutely accurate, but I believe in the Prisma's most recent research, it's something like 7 to 1, 7 students
Mhm.
to one teacher in the average Jewish day school, the student teacher ratio. In Catholic schools, it's on average like 12 to 1. So that seems okay. It's not such a big deal, but you spread this out.
Right. Well, when you spread it out, it means we're spending almost double on our teachers in ratio to our students,
Yes,
which, and given that 80 some or 90 some percent of our staffing costs are personnel,
correct.
that's going to be a huge driver.
Yeah, and it's a huge driver. And I think I, I think one of the big questions is why is I understand in small communities and small populations, but like even in the larger schools, why is that? And
Hmm.
this is an area where we delved into a little bit, but it wasn't really what the report was about. But I think that we have to really understand that in general, small schools, small classes, they create higher per student costs, but many families value individualized attention and close relationships, and it's simply one of the realities that impact school economics. So it's really not a criticism of Jewish schools, but more as an observation. Every educational model involves trade-offs, and
Hmm.
And I think we talk a lot about individualized attention and reaching every student and so forth. And we also talk a lot about affordability and making sure that schools can be attainable.
Right. And so
I
one
think,
of the things that jumps out for me for
yeah,
that is what you've done in this report is very simply, on a really basic level, say there might be another way of looking at this. We're
yeah,
doing it one way. The average Catholic school may do it a different way in terms of class size
yeah,
specifically, which to me, as a head of school, would say, huh, that might be worth thinking about. It doesn't mean we're necessarily changing it. And we
right,
don't want to start lowering the quality of what either the quality or the perceived quality of our offerings, because we
correct.
know that's crucial. And that goes to enrollment, which negatively impacts class sizes. We don't want to get into that vicious cycle.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that, at least for me, gives me a little bit of pause that if there's other private and parochial schools that are almost double our student to teacher ratio, then we have to ask ourselves, is what we're pursuing on balance, taking all of these factors into account, the right model? Or are there some tweaks that we might consider to rebalance the whole affordability equation?
That's I love these questions. This is exactly why we wrote this report, because we want school leaders and community leaders to really start thinking about these the different models out there and the different options. And again, not criticizing Jewish schools at all. I love Jewish day schools. This my whole life's work here. But really, we can learn from other communities, and this is just one of those areas that that maybe we can think about. And again, you said something very interesting in here, which was we don't want to impact quality, and then you said perceive quality. And I think
Hmm.
that's also something. I mean, perceived quality, the perception of quality in many ways is what schools care the most about, because that is how you grow
Hmm.
enrollment and get a higher, better critical mass of students.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And we know that there are various studies about class size and the impact of class size. And most of those studies, John Hattie's meta analysis of tens of thousands of studies, indicate that class size is not a primary driver of educational quality, that teacher quality and teacher skill, knowledge, approach, etc., is a much higher driver than the number of kids in the room, a much more impactful driver than the number of kids in the room. And yet, there are certain, I would call them non-discussables, right? The undiscussables
Mhm.
that, well, we have to have a very low student teacher ratio. That's part of what we're promising, part of what we're giving. And I think it actually pushes us as school leaders to say, what we need to deliver is high quality education in a way that gives us a sustainable path to continue providing that high quality education. And so this, I think, raises some crucial issues. Again, you're not saying you have the answers, but you're saying
Right.
these might be worth thinking about a little bit differently.
Yeah. And I mean, everything I agree with everything you just said, Barry, about, for heads to think about this. It is one of the four drivers. It is the one area we have the most control over.
Mhm.
Again, we're not going to change the dual curriculum. We don't want to. We're not going to change security, but enrollment and student teacher ratio are areas that we do have some control over. And it's interesting that you brought up those studies, because since publishing this report, many people have brought that up to me, and so perhaps that is a bigger conversation we need to have in the day school world.
Right. Absolutely. And the fascinating thing, if we look behind the numbers of student teacher ratio, is actually who those teachers are and what they're doing. And we know that in a Jewish day school, it may be your typical classroom teacher, but there may be a co-teacher, an assistant, a specialist, somebody
Mhm.
providing individualized support. There's a lot of pieces in that. And I know this is a lot for schools to take on, but
Yeah.
just to have kind of the notion in your head that studying your staff allocation and your staffing ratios across the school is a really important thing to do from time to time. You don't do it once a week, but once a year or once every couple of years to look at that and say, are we where we want to be? And might there be a different way of approaching this because it's, as you said, it's one of the only factors we can control. And I do want to touch on that last factor, which was really the idea of Jewish day schools as independent versus Catholic schools as within a broader parish system, which is giving them outside support in a sense.
Yeah. So in this report, we had to come up with some terms. So we used the user fee for Jewish schools, primarily families paying tuition, and obviously community support and philanthropic donor support and so forth. But we talked about the parish subsidy model a lot, and this was totally new. I mean, I had an understanding before going in that every archdiocese is going to support their local Catholic schools, but I didn't really have a clear understanding of what this parish subsidy model really means for their communities. So as we mentioned, both Catholic schools and Jewish day schools rely on tuition and community support. The difference is really how that support is structured. Historically, Catholic schools, they build in community support directly into the operating model through the parishes and through the archdiocese. Whereas Jewish schools, we rely very heavily on philanthropy, foundations, the cycle of annual campaigns and fundraising and so forth, and direct tuition. So I want to be very clear that the question is not whether communities support their schools. Both communities support the schools, but it's how they support each family. And so, enter into how does that enter into the work, when a family is choosing a school?
Hmm.
So when a
Right.
family,
Because the family bears the cost in our system, that decision point is much higher for them. And the
yeah,
stress point is much higher.
yes. And again, going back to the tuition and the sticker price, like the parish subsidy model, they spread the cost of education over the wider community. Tuition covers part of the cost. The parish, the archdiocese, other shared resource help cover the rest. But the distinction is really that much of the community support, like, it's already built into the structure. So when you go to a Catholic website and you see what the cost of tuition is, it's already built into there. So
Hmm.
somebody who doesn't have any children at all, never going to send anybody to a Catholic school, but belongs to a parish, part of their support goes to the schools of their parish. And it's just built in. It's
Hmm.
not even a question. Does that mean that they don't have to raise annual funds as well? No, of course they do, but so much less than what we have to do. And we have all the charts on there that show, maybe it's 5% versus 30%, something like that. So you
Right.
get the whole, I mean, I don't, again, the Jewish community supports day schools, but
Hmm.
often it's not the wider Jewish community. It's the direct recipients and maybe the alumni and grandparents and so forth. So yes, there's a wider net and community foundations like Samis and others. But in the parish subsidy model, everybody who's a member of the parish is supporting the schools truly without even thinking about it. It's built
Right.
into their system.
Right. And this is, an important point. It's one that's come up before, uh, one that when NNJ Kids was started probably about 15, 20 years ago, was one of their pieces as well of, we need to make Jewish education a community burden, not a family burden and not a school burden. And at
Yes.
the same time, so any communal leaders who are listening, please think about this. We need it. And I do want to acknowledge, as you said, there are many community foundations. There are also many federations who give tremendous support. I benefited from that in Cleveland with a federation that was tremendously supportive of day schools. And at the same time, there's so much more that needs to be done to enable to enable families to make the tuition burden. I'm curious, what, if anything, came out of there, because this is such a wide piece, that individual schools could think about or potentially even act on?
So one of the other findings of this report that really is, relevant to every community is it seems to be when we looked at community-wide affordability initiatives, and we looked at Jewish schools that had their own affordability initiative. Almost every Jewish school is going to have their own affordability initiative as well. But the communities that had some kind of a community-wide initiative, like we do in Seattle, like Samis, those initiatives were very effective in bringing the cost of tuition down to, close to Catholic school levels. Whereas on individual, communities that do it school by school, it's much harder. It's much, you still bring
Mhm.
tuition down, but it's much harder. But what I mean by that, and this is a distinction I think is important for our community. In the Catholic world, the stated tuition is for everybody. So the tuition is already brought down lower. We already talked about the sticker shock in Jewish schools, again, in the communities that we studied and in many communities. But when we look at our affordability initiative at Samis and in Seattle, our middle income affordability initiative, we see that the families that are on this initiative are actually paying tuition very close to Catholic school levels. This is Seattle stat. I don't have it for the other communities, but our families in Seattle, about 35% of our day school families are part of this initiative we call Day School Affordability. And on average, they're paying about $11,500 per student in day school. That's on average. There's a range between the schools. That's pretty close to Catholic levels. Now, the difference is that's 35% of the pie of our day school families.
Mm.
It's not the tuition that you see on the website. So in the
Mhm.
models, you're going to see that whatever it is, 11,000, 12,000, 15, that you're going to see that on the website. And so one of our findings here is that if you can implement a community-wide initiative, you'll have a greater success of bringing tuition down to the levels approaching Catholic school. However, it's not for all students in the school. And we have to remember, in our community, in our day school community, we have 35% of our families getting assistance through our middle income affordability initiative, and we have 30% of families getting assistance through our traditional tuition assessment. That's 65% of our families. That really means that the remainder family, they are helping they're helping the whole system. And I think that's the biggest difference between us and in the Catholic community. But to answer your question, implementing a community-wide initiative may have greater success than doing it school by school, unless a school has a major philanthropic backer, so there's more reliability for the long term.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, the message on one level is to schools out there that it might be worth partnering with others or advocating to your community leaders. And the,
Yeah.
the last message that I heard is what we put out there publicly also matters. In other words, we often fall into an approach of we'll have a high sticker price and give a lot of financial aid. And there's advantages to that because families
Yeah.
who can afford the sticker price
Correct.
are paying the sticker price. But there's also a disadvantage, and the disadvantage is either families who look at the sticker price and say, maybe not for me, or families who might even enroll, but that sticker price becomes an emotional, psychological burden that they're carrying over time. And I know there are a number of schools within the Jewish day school world that have done some form of middle income affordability on a school by school basis,
Mhm.
and in most cases, what we've found with those schools is their success has come from publicizing it,
Yes.
from being transparent on their website as, here is the level of AGI, your annual gross adjusted income, and here is the tuition that you will pay in each of these brackets, which takes the mystery out of it for families and just creates a much more accessible environment. So I think there are definitely pieces that we can think about that will impact us.
Exactly right. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because there are many schools out there. I mean, we comb school websites to see where they have the index tuition, where it's very, very clear. And it's amazing. I do think that if you're already a diehard day school family, that resonates very well. But if you're trying day school for the very first time, even that can be daunting.
Hmm.
In our community, most of the Jewish kids in our community don't go to Jewish day school, so we're constantly trying to bring more into the fold, and so we do have to be mindful of that, and every school has to be mindful of the messaging, because our communities do. Every community wants to lower the barrier for participation,
Absolutely.
and they do it in many creative ways. So yes, thank you for bringing that up. It's so true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a lot more here. So I would definitely encourage everyone to read the article that was in the most recent issue of Hayedion from Prisma, and also the more extended report, which has all of this data. Again, some of it's really detailed, but there are nuggets there that if you're looking, you can pull out and apply to your school or help you think about your school. And Melissa, thank you for sharing all of this with us, and thank you for being with us. If people have questions specifically for you, is there a way that they can reach you afterwards?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me on. This is one of my favorite topics. So I've enjoyed the conversation immensely. And please, anybody is welcome to reach out to us. My email address is Melissa R. So Melissa R at Samis.
Amazing. Amazing. And we will have that in the show notes as well for those of you who would like to look there. And as you're wrapping up, you're thinking about this, try and take 1 or 2 points. Maybe it's thinking about your class size and your staff to student ratio, or maybe it's thinking about how you conceptualize and then communicate what your tuition is at various levels. There may be something here that sparks a thought that has to percolate, because these are big topics for months or even years, but ultimately can shift our model and tweak our model so that we inch towards more and more affordability alongside more and more educational quality and educational excellence. Thank you for joining us today. And for
Thank
those who
you.
want to reach me afterwards, you can always reach me, Barry Kislowitz, on LinkedIn, Leadership Lenses on Substack, or on our website, kislowitzconsulting.com.